And so I'm going to show you sort of the idea here. Now, this is the auto CPAP algorithm. You raise the CPAP when you see a problem. You don't have anything to tell you to lower it. So you wait a certain amount of time, or you lower it and see what happens. Sense Awake is different. You go up for the same thing, but you lower it whenever you find out the person's awake. And guess what? There's a beautiful signal that we haven't tapped on. I just read another example of this in a trashy book I was reading on the plane on my way home from New Zealand. You all know this, okay? When you read a romantic novel, all right, and the guy, it's always the guy, is trying to sneak out on his wife, right? So he gets in bed, and he's really anxious to go out and meet his girlfriend. What does he do? He waits until her breathing becomes regular. Then he knows she's asleep, and he sneaks out the window, right? Well, we figured we'd do the same thing, all right? We look at the breathing, and we ask the question, what's the relationship? But irregularity means you're awake. And regularity is highly suggestive of sleepiness. And as I said, this is all over. Once you hear it, you say, of course, I knew that, right? Well, what we did is we harnessed it, and we said, that's going to tell us when you're awake. If you breathe regularly, we're going to assume you're asleep. But if you breathe irregularly, we'll assume you're awake, and we'll just crash the CPAP, turn it off as fast as we can. All right? And that's the idea behind it. Let me show you some examples that led to this. And this was a paper we published about a year ago. Here is the breathing during a period which, you'll take my word for it, this is the brainwaves of sleep. This breathing is so monotonous. I mean, it puts the text to sleep to watch you do this. This is normal, regular breathing. That is an arousal. And I used to look at this and say, sleep, he woke up right here. Okay? And in fact, if you look up at the brainwaves, I'd be right most of the time. That's what we noticed. That's what led to this idea. And in fact, sometimes you even wake up for just a little tiny period. This is about 10 seconds of wakefulness. So sleep here, wake, sleep here again. Look at what the breathing did. Regular, this little irregularity, which is easy to detect by eye, a little harder by computer, but can be detected by computer, says he's awake or she's awake. And that's what the idea is. So now what we did is we said, okay, how good are we? We tested it. It's pretty good. We almost never made a mistake calling wakefulness. You don't do this every time. Some people wake up and still breathe regularly. So it's not a perfect substitute for EEG, but it's pretty good. When it's there, that means the person will wake up, which is exactly what I want to know. It's the time I want to turn off the CPAP. And I'm going to show you what actually happens in the machine. This is the way the machine works. Person's here, he's asleep. This is the irregularity, it's detected. Here's the pressure running at about 11, 12, detects it. It goes down to 4, which is the lowest we can currently go down to, and we're still working on trying to get it down to 0. So the idea is, when you wake up, or when you do anything that indicates you're awake, I'll turn off your CPAP. Now, does it work? I don't know, all right? We haven't had the machine long enough, and there hasn't been a big trial of this to do the real test, which I subjected all these other technologies to in presenting them and said, yeah, great idea, really nice, you know, it'll sell some machines, but does it really help people use CPAP more? We don't know. Those tests are going on, and I'm not doing them, okay? So somebody else will give you the answer, I hope very soon. Yes? That's a great question, okay? So what this relates to is that we know REM sleep is a very irregular state. Your breathing becomes irregular in REM. We were very worried about that. It turns out, and I skipped past that data, it's a different kind of irregularity. And the computer program actually can be written, was written, and is tested, that very rarely mistakes them. In fact, we suspected that already from looking at it. If you look at the irregularity in breathing that happens with wakefulness, it's mostly big breaths thrown in. And if you look at the irregularity with REM, it's mostly little breaths thrown in. And so there is a difference. They're both irregular, but in a visually different way. And if you can tell, a computer can be trained to do the same thing. That's what we did. Because of the way we train them, I can't guarantee it's exactly that simple. We did it with what's called a neural net, which has to be trained, and you don't know exactly what it's doing. You just train it like you would a novice. You say, that was right, that was wrong, that was right. And it learns. That's all inside the software. So you don't know exactly what it's doing. We think that's what it's doing. And the bottom line is you test it, and it either works or it doesn't work. We tested it. It's pretty good. It's remarkable how often it detects wakefulness. What I can't tell you is that that translates into better use or more comfort, except anecdotally. Those trials are going on and presumably will come out shortly. But to me, it's an intellectually appealing. That's why we did it, and that's what keeps me having fun and Yes?
Maybe I missed the point. Why do you want to turn it off when you work?
Okay, the idea is that if you're not uncomfortable, I don't care, and I wouldn't use this if you're happy with your CPAP. But if you're unhappy with your CPAP, and if you're one of those people who says, I can't use it, or uses it only 3 or 4 hours a night, and says, I can't breathe out, the pressure bothers me, well, there are many reasons for that, and obviously the mask might be part of the problem, or the strap, or being tethered to a hose. These are things I'm not going to solve with any technology. I'm only talking about that little tiny piece, which is the pressure. And one of the things that patients complain about to me and to many doctors is, I can't breathe, I don't like the CPAP, I feel like I'm suffocating, I don't like it, okay? The mask feels uncomfortable, but when I loosen it, it doesn't feel uncomfortable. Well, that's pressure. And so my response is, if I take away the CPAP completely every time you wake up and put it back on every time you go to sleep, that would be ideal. I haven't figured out how to do all of that, but I can do one thing, I can change the pressure. And that's what we're doing. There are actually some other things we're trying to do about changing the strap pressure and making the mask seem to disappear. That's still in development. If we ever get to the point where I can use phase space and put it in the 4th dimension temporarily, we'll do that too, but we're not there yet. The pressure idea, though, is around the idea that if you don't need the CPAP, I want to take it away because maybe you'll like it better and fall asleep faster.
But I put the mask on, therefore I can't breathe very well.
Well,
so actually air in the mask.
If that's true, this isn't going to help you. But if pressure's interfering, which, as I said, is an assumption we've made, then it might help you. I can't answer the question until I do it. But you're right. I have a small vested interest, but I don't have a commitment to the answer. We'll find out. That's the only way you can do these things. Yes?
You feel as though there's something where you feel that's kind of a big reaction. Does that mean that you're not acting, that's indicative that your weight is not staying open?
It may or may not.
Or is it just getting
Yeah,
used to it?
again, a great question. It may or may not. In some cases, the suffocation is a sign that you're at too low a pressure, that you've not been treated, and you're sensing the beginning of the apnea. You're not quite asleep yet, and you're having an apnea, and you're sensing that. In other cases, and that's more typical on CPAP, it has nothing to do with that. We look at the tracing, we say, you should be fine, but you have an emotional or a reaction that's based on something other than the need for CPAP physiologically. It's based on the fact that you'd rather not be wearing the mask.
Most studies are taken. Like it's other kinds of abnormalities. But there's not specific comments on the report on feeling suffocated. Or, if you will, quote unquote, negative responses that would be very helpful, not only to the individual, but also in terms of what's really the heart of all this. Is the correct analysis of what is the problem?
You're absolutely right, but you all know this, you probably all know the joke about the gentleman who drops his watch on a dark street, and he's looking under the lamppost and searching around. A policeman comes along and says, what's the problem? He says, I dropped my watch. The two of them look together for half an hour. At the end of half an hour, the policeman says, are you sure this is where you dropped it? He said, no, I dropped it up the street. So why are you looking here? It's because this is where the light is. Okay? Well, sleep studies are very much like that also. It's easy to report things that we can make rules about. It's very hard to ask a patient how he feels throughout the night, especially if you're a technician taking care of 4 patients, and even more so if the patient doesn't volunteer. It says, I can't stand this, I really want to take medicine, but doesn't tell anybody. So the problem is real. If we had the luxury of somebody sitting at the bedside like a psychiatrist and interviewing you continuously whenever you weren't asleep and recording that in a way that could be tabulated, we might have the answer to your question, but we don't. We do things, and we do the easy things. We're like the guy looking for his watch under the lamppost. We can record breathing, we can record brainwaves, so we look at that, and we don't always pay as much attention as we should. Now, I don't mean to make it a criticism of the lab, because in 90% of the cases that works. But if you're one of the ones where that doesn't give the answer, ideally, we should go further in your case and not in the others, and ask more questions.